Good day and welcome to this webinar, Right-Size Your SAP Licenses to Prepare for Your Rise with SAP. My name is Rogan Morrison. I'm a Delivery Director here with VOQUZ Labs in Africa and MENA. And today, together with me, I have Martin Sloch, Head of the SAP Delivery Africa at Hdl Technologies, and we welcome you to this webinar. Just some housekeeping. There is a questions bar at the bottom of your panel on the right-hand side. Please put any questions in there during the course of the webinar. We will have some time for questions at the end of the webinar, and we look forward to your interaction in the webinar. We will run some polls during the course of the webinar. It's always good to get some feedback from yourselves in the context of this interesting topic. And also this webinar is recorded and we will be sharing the recording of this webinar with you afterwards. So please feel free to grab a copy of that and share it and look through it again if necessary. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to us. But great to have everybody on board today. And let's click off and get this going from this point on. So just a little bit about our two companies, and let's get into that, and I'll hand over to Martin just for a quick overview on the Hdl organization. Martin, you're on mute, so welcome.
Yes. Hello and good day, everyone. Yeah, Martin Sloch here, and as Rogan said, I head up the delivery capability for Africa for Hdl Technologies. We've got a global practice, as you can see here, with more than 9,500 consultants. Typically, they've got more than 7 years of experience, hundreds of customers, and more than 1,500 of engagements. You can see a lot of the sort of big clients of ours on the logos here at the bottom, and we operate in all of the various industries you can think of. And we obviously are also a very close partner to SAP. And we're actually one of the few global partners, true global partners of SAP, and we actually provide not only services to SAP, but we also co-develop together some of the solutions with SAP. Yeah, thank you, Rogan.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Martin, and great to have you on board this webinar today. Just in terms of our company, VOQUZ Labs has been around from 2012 and a bit earlier. And our real focus is specifically on SAP licensing, authorizations, and compliance management add-ons, as well as providing advisory services for these specific areas. We are a niche provider in the SAP specific area and focus only on SAP. We do, and I'll show you in a slide or two later, we do have partners that focus outside of that on other vendors, the Microsofts, the Oracles, etc. So if you're looking for an entire end-to-end SAP or SAM compliance structure and license management across your application landscape, we can help you with that. But in context, we have two main solutions. I'm going to jump into those two now, SAMQ and SETQ. And as I said, we have organizational customer branches around the world. As I said, we have two main solutions, SAMQ and SETQ. We're not going to focus on the SETQ solution in this specific webinar. We do have a whole set of webinars that we talk around the authorizations and compliance aspect. We'll be talking, we've already spoken about a bit of role optimization and role reductions and how we manage help organizations with that. But today we're focusing on the license management side and its importance in relation to a rise with SAP and a move to that space in terms of cloud. And what we really therefore cover from a SAMQ solution perspective is the management of named user license optimization, digital access and indirect usage of third-party access systems accessing the SAP core and document counts, authorization-based licensing as compared to user-based licensing. We'll touch on a little bit of that later in the presentation, as well as engine measurements and alerting. And then, of course, what's important for a RISE contract is the S/4HANA license migration, understanding the parameters of moving from ECC to S/4HANA, what will change from a licensing migration perspective. And of course, what's most important to most organizations is the compliance of that license usage that they've contracted with SAP. So make sure you maintain that compliance in an automated way. I see there's a hand up. I'm not sure if that's a question, but we'll come to questions later. In terms of the advisory services, you'll see that on the right underneath here, we offer very strong advisory services to help customers understand, total cost of ownership models and the compliance aspects in terms of what they may be out of compliance with. We'll share some slides on that as well. We do quite a number of indirect access evaluations for customers, and it's important this year because that model is almost changing in a way with the DAAP program that SAP have been running for the last 2.5 years. Will probably fall away at the end of this year, most likely. And then we also help customers with license audit defense and that contract migration that we spoke about. Really important there. Some of our clients across the world, very large organizations that we've been helping for a number of years. And you'll see on the right-hand side some of the values in terms of size of organizations that we're working with, from 1.2 million users all the way down to very small users that have only 300 users in a system. Some people like Willida, etc. What's also important is we run plus minus 100 projects per year, and therefore we have very deep expertise in the contracts that SAP provides to their clients. And we have a number of reselling partners, including HCL. We work across many business industry sectors, and as I said, we have a number of other SAM partners that help us to manage other vendor license structures, etc. Right, let's jump into license management. And what's key in license management is really this building type effect. It's really important to understand that a license structure is made up of a number of different components. We'll speak about them during the course of this webinar, but I like to give an analogy of it's similar to a house type structure, and every license structure has a foundation, which is really your SAP contract. And in those foundations that you have specific elements. If you're building a house, you normally have certain reinforcements in there, rebar, etc. And in here we have things like the volume of your licenses, the user rights that you actually are specifically pertaining to your organization industry, the metrics that you're using on engines, the definitions, and the general terms and conditions. So these are specific aspects that make up the specific contract. And then as the walls of this house, we have 4 main areas: the named users, the engines, the digital access, and the database. We'll look at each one of those individually and drill down into a bit of more information of what do you need to understand and what do you need to consider in each of these areas if you're on an ECC license and you want to move to RISE with SAP. And that really contributes to the house of the roof of the house, which is your maintenance base, and the consolidation of that. And this is really fundamentally changes when you move to a cloud-based solution, which is a subscription-based, and we'll talk about the RISE context in relation to these other elements and how to right-size your licenses before moving into the cloud. Very, very important in that aspect. So what is some of the challenges in the licensing environment? You'll see on the right-hand side here, you've got users, engines, HANA, digital access or user-based access in terms of documents versus legacy, perpetuals and subscriptions, on-premise clouds, RISE, HEC, hyperscalers, public-private clouds, list prices and discounts. SAP has more than over 3,000 SAP SKUs available for purchase, and I'm sure many organizations have a number of those SKUs in their bill of material. And within that context, you then have to break this down and really decompose it better so that you understand what is the user license quantities and types. The engines, there's over 2,000 different engines and modules within that engine bill of material potentially. The database, what type of database are you running? Is it runtime or enterprise use? What database itself are you running? Are you running a HANA database, a non-HANA database, etc.? And then the digital access side. And within that context, if you draw that down a further level of granularity or detail lower, you start having to understand the difference in price variations. So example of an ESS user is approximately 60 euros on the prices versus a developer of 6,000. And really what happens is it becomes very complex and challenging to manage all of this complexity across all the different layers from a licensing perspective. What do you have to comply to from a named user license perspective? You must classify your users in accordance with their current use and with the underlying price system when you have a system measurement. So you are, if you're running SAP, you need to make sure that you've classified your users correctly. And that classification, the responsibility lies with the client. And what we find often is that, yes, many clients get 70% of their users correctly licensed, but there's this very big portion of 30% that are incorrectly licensed, and out of that we find a significant volume that are either incorrectly classified or that they're just not in use. So the inactive portion of usage can be very high. Organizations that have gone through a restructuring and are no longer using specific licenses is often the case where you have a higher degree of inactivity and usage, etc. So it's very important to understand the context of the licensing from a named user perspective. This is one aspect. We'll touch on this as well. In terms of engine reporting, of course, you need to understand the volume of engine use. So, and that needs to be in sync with your business rhythm. So you can't just measure it on a monthly base and then expect that when you have high months of activity at financial year ends, quarter ends, etc., that your engine use does not go up. Of course it does. So it's very important to get accurate measurements of engine usage on a regular basis. And so this is important to be able to get these details from this context. And then indirect and digital access reporting, and the other pillar that we're talking about is really whether or not you should stay on your legacy model, which is a combination of users and engines, the sales and service order engine and the procurement or purchasing order engine, and the users that would be applicable to cater for third-party application indirect access. That really caters your legacy model. And then the later model that SAP brought out in terms of digital access, which is the documents-based model, where you have 9 different document types. You need to consider those document types as an example of some of them listed down here and their counts, and you need to be able to validate that. So again, putting this together, you're seeing we've got named users, engines, digital access, and the documentation of that. And then understanding the database license. So which is the right database to be on? How much database usage CPUs do you need to use? What is the cost implication of that from an uplift perspective? And which is the most applicable one if you're going to move to S4HANA? Of course, you need to run on the HANA database, but do you take a runtime edition? Do you take an enterprise edition? What is the right sizing for you? And that's really critical. So we're talking about the 4 different main key license pillars in this context, and some around the context of that. What is our industry and the research that we've done and the projects that we've done shown? And this is a key critical slide that we highlight to customers, that more or less only 1 out of every 10 customers have got it right, more or less. 10% are in control of their licenses. The other 90% are either in a state of either over license position, which is 60%, and 30% are at audit risk. In other words, they're in an under license position. And in some cases, we often find in certain areas of the license bill of material or the audit that we do, that some clients have both a mix of under license and over license based on certain engine usage and named users, etc. And when we look at the over licensed usage, we often find customers range between very small amounts of over license down here to very large amounts of over license, over 65% in this top quadrant up here, and anything in between. And then on the under license side, we find customers are ranging all the way from very small as well to even greater than the entire contract value, so more than 80% at risk from a contract value perspective. And on average, we find from our project and our investigations that we have see from customers that they're about 2 million euros on average shelfware per client, which in real maintenance values comes out at about 400,000 euros from an average maintenance base for that shelfware. And from an under license perspective, 1.5 million euros average customer risk. So the numbers that we're talking about are not insignificant, and it's really important what we try and aim for in terms of making sure before you move to the RISE platform is that you get this licensing structure correct. Okay, let's talk a little bit about RISE with SAP, and I would like to hand over to Martin now, just to talk us through some slides around RISE with SAP, because we want to contextualize this webinar and this discussion in the context with RISE with SAP. But before we do that, and before I hand over to Martin, I'd like to just run a quick poll with everybody and just ask a specific set of questions here, just to get an understanding of where everybody is from a contract perspective. So just let's run this poll here. So are you likely to move to a RISE with SAP contract in the next, and you'll see I'm going to launch the poll here, in the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, or not decided. So it'd be great to have your feedback to get some context of where are, excuse me, where are companies in their SAP journey. Okay, and thank you for filling in that poll. We've got about 60% of the vote come in already, which is great. We're going to leave it open for a little while, let people have an opportunity to take some time to think about where they are in their SAP journey. It may be that you're working with another customer and you maybe use them as an example, but great to understand what is I mean, RISE with SAP is pretty new, but there's certainly customers are planning for this, and it helps us to align in terms of their planning when we talk about licensing and making sure you have the right size licensing. Okay, I think we're going to close the poll now, and thank you for that. We've got 70% in, which gives us a good indication. And let's share that poll with you now. So similar to what we had earlier today in an earlier webinar, a small number of customers are likely to move to the RISE with SAP in the next 6 months. Yep. 17% in the next 12 months. That's quite interesting. It's a much higher number. 4% in the next 24 months, and 72% not decided yet. That is what we expected, given the fact that RISE with SAP is pretty new and that customers are still understanding what it is and what it entails for them, and whether or not they're ready to move to a cloud-based solution. So let me hand over and just hide the poll and take the poll away and go back to our slides, and hand over to Martin. And Martin, if you'd like to take a little bit of the RISE with SAP, and I'll just click the slides when you ask.
Yeah. Thank you, Rogan. Just doing an audio check.
Yep, we hear you loud and clear.
Good. Okay. So yeah, interesting to see this poll. And again, I'm not all that surprised. I guess, as Rogan has said, RISE with SAP is probably still relatively new, and it's probably also at this point in time there's more questions about it than there's answers. But I think it will come clearer in the next couple of months. If you can go to the next slide, and just to sort of say a few opening remarks about SAP and SAP's strategy. I mean, we all know that SAP is pushing the cloud agenda quite hard, and in fact we find that some of the licenses for some of the modules and solutions are actually only available in cloud these days. And we all know also that ECCC and on-premise licenses will actually over the years start to disappear and not be available anymore, and will also not be maintained any longer. So maybe let's go into the next slide, and if we understand it as being the overall strategy that SAP is following, and then obviously as customers and implementation partners, we have to follow that. So you were sitting on a crossroads, and it's not just a fork. There's a number of options actually that would be available for SAP customers that are currently on-premise solutions. And obviously you can move onto your own hyperscaler if you would want to. Stay on your maintenance that you have for now. As I said, 2027 is a key date at this point in time for this option to actually run out. I'm going to come to option 2 in a moment, and just going to go into the other 2 options. There's one also to do a lift and shift and run a managed service and buy your own licenses. Once again, you've got a limitation to 2027 on that one. And of course, you can use this opportunity to say, well, let me review actually the SAP solution as a whole and actually see is there other solutions that would also play in the cloud and would similar and solve my business problems. But the one that I suppose we see as a very attractive one is the one that sits under number 2, and that is actually to make use of the RISE offer. And I guess the biggest benefit of that is that you would have to deal with one company, and that is SAP, for your software applications and your infrastructure, which will now be provided as a service from SAP. So if you can jump 2 slides ahead, please. I think we can skip the one in the middle, standard SAP slide. That one I would like to talk about for a moment exactly. So as I said, here in the middle of that circle, you can see you've got one contract and you've got one responsible company. And if we look at the first 2 items there, if you look at that circle on the top, it says that SAP S/4HANA Cloud, be it either public cloud or private cloud. Obviously, that is the application, and that's been around now for a couple of years. So I think there's no surprise. I think where the difference comes now in is actually that second item, which is your infrastructure provisioning, where SAP actually has negotiated deals with hyperscalers, and essentially will take that away from you, and you do not have to make that choice yourself about the infrastructure and the hyperscaler that you want to use. You can, of course, go to SAP and say you've got a preference for any of the 1, 2, 3, or 4 that are currently in the market for that. But again, it's what we can see. It is actually an attractive offering that comes to market by SAP, and it will most definitely make life much less complex for a CIO and any IT organization actually that our clients run at the moment. Just to give you that visibility, HCL themselves, actually, we've just signed our RISE deal with SAP. So it's always good to actually understand yourself what it means to take up an offer from SAP, because it makes it easier to advise customers. So we're in the process actually of rising, so to say, if that's a word that we can use now. You can see there's a number of other sort of offerings that are included, such as the business process intelligence, and you can custom code and others. I see them as less everything else.
Martin, we may be struggling to hear you on that side. I just want to check with one of my other organizers. Sebastian, can you hear Martin on that side clearly?
Relevant.
Okay, I think we've lost Martin there somewhere on the audio. So what I'll do is I'll try and pick this up with Martin. He may have an audio issue on that side. So let's continue with the slides and move on. Hopefully we'll pick Martin up shortly. Martin, if you hear me on that side, sorry, your audio seemed to be having some challenge, but we're going to move on and we'll come back to the rest of the slides here, and we'll come back to the slide if necessary. maybe I'll just give you some context while Martin is resolving some of that audio issue. HCL does offer a cloud smart and a full stack offering for SAP Cloud Transformation Journey. And within this, it's an addition to the Rise with SAP. Please, I would suggest if you need more information about this, reach out to Martin or to any of your contacts in HCL. They will certainly be able to help you with this element from a framework perspective, and they'll be able to take you forward on this journey from a cloud-based perspective. Okay, let's jump into right-sizing your licenses before you move. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail from a step-by-step approach in the context of what do we do from a VOQUZ Labs perspective to help organizations get to the right size of licensing so that they can do a comparison between their existing bill of material and the effective license position that they're in and the potential new contract that they will receive from SAP. So most organizations suffer with the following challenges. So how do we achieve an optimized and compliant audit results? How can we contract the right products with SAP? Of course, this is what we're talking about now. And then thirdly, are we spending too much for SAP products? So first of all, make sure that you are optimized and compliant. That's probably one of the most important aspects. We'll talk about a step-by-step process there. As you can see, the average customer normally manages around 3,500 users across 20 different systems. That gives you 70,000 data points to analyze. It's not possible to do so manually. It's just too much effort, and without a tool-based system, you really aren't going to come out with the right answers. So on the right-hand side, you can see what offerings we have available. Secondly, in terms of product complexity, making sure you understand the demand perspective. What are the right metrics for the different products in the different spaces that SAP are offering, and making sure you get the right volume of those products is really critical, and we help you understand that from a product and a licensing perspective. And then in terms of making sure that you don't pay too much, we also help you to assess the usage, the pricing, and the discounts in your specific contract to make sure that you get the best output from a product perspective when SA puts a deal on the table. And this counts very much for RISE too. So just be aware of this. This is really what we are specifically engaged in our businesses. A little bit more about SAMQ as a solution. How do we use the SAMQ solution? Because we fundamentally believe that it's not possible to come out with the right data information if you don't have a tool-based approach. It's just not possible. The complexity inside of the SAP applications and the volume of applications and their connections are just too varied, and sometimes landscape complexity is too high for you to do this all manually. So we have a transactional database that is used to analyze the usage of individuals working on the SAP system. Together with that, we customize this logic and use rights. We have management dashboards that track engine use. We can do a comparison against the SLAW workbench to do an accurate comparison of what you see in the context of your current allocation of licenses versus once you've optimized those. We can then furthermore automate this license management. I'll talk about that later in the slide deck, as well as deactivate automated users and stop inactivity in its tracks. And then we've got some analysis and simulation, really important to be able to simulate the correct licensing structures for an S/4HANA move. You need to understand what you've got currently licensed in your users. If you've got professionals, limited professionals, ESS, employees, logistics workers, whatever one of those categories you have, how will that be translated to an S/4HANA license? Cost allocations, I'll talk about cost allocations and how we see those. As I say, users, engines, and digital access is all covered inside the license optimization solution, and it's very quick and easy in a step-by-step process. So let's work through that step-by-step process. Step one really talks about installing the SAMQ solution on your ABAP solution manager. It's quick, it's easy. It more or less takes an hour and a half and the software is installed. For many customers, they go through a few steps. They might install it on dev, take it out in dev, and then transport it all the way to prod, which is quite a standard way of migrating it up the chain. And then we use the current RFC connections to connect to your ECC systems, and whether they're dev or production. And we have really only one user plus 2 roles and a digital access transport as well that goes into the ECC. And the reason for that is we want to measure your digital document count in both ECC and HCM. If you've got a separate box for HCM, we'll load that same context into the HCM box as well, because we need to look at time management documentation. So that's step 1 in this process of starting to right size your licenses. The next step is we start configuring your inventory. So we look at what volume you've purchased as per your contract, and we start categorizing those. You'll see 52, 52, 56 here is the license category and the volume that you purchased from an inventory amount. This is on the named user side. We'll talk a little bit about engines and databases later, etc. And really what happens in the context of the SAMQ solution is it starts to compare as we do configuration and optimization. We start to understand the comparison between what your inventory is giving you've bought versus what your old users are in terms of your allocation versus what your optimization users are. And this is really, we do some, again, step 4, detailed user profiling. We look at specific sets of users, and we can use the tool to show these users in terms of the components and the applications used by individuals, so that you can make sure that from a business usage perspective that these people are actually doing the right set of work and that they're not doing work that they shouldn't be. And we also consolidate this from all the various different systems. So if you're running multiple different production systems, you want to consolidate this information and bring it together in a roll-up of information to make better use of it. As I said, the step 5 is we reflect your license contract. We fill in the relevant details and the specific usage for each license type. We determine the parameters, and we've got a whole configuration structure sitting here, as well as mapping master data fields, Z transaction codes, etc. We manage all of this in the actual system from a configuration perspective so that it matches what your contract actually stipulates that you can do from a licensing perspective. And then we start pulling the reports out once we've done all of this. And as you can see, we do some user analysis, and we can show here quite clearly what the licensing validity is in terms of from an inventory to a measured in SAP to an optimized state, and what the difference and the differential is. Financially, we can also create that financial viewpoint so that you can see roughly the difference from an inventory perspective and what your actual configuration would be with it from a law perspective, and then what the optimization is and the difference. And this is where we come up with these representation from dealing with lots of customers of how much over license and under license there is. And this is the important part, being able to understand your license usage in order to determine the right size. Right, let's move on to the next slide. Normally, if you have SAMQ installed fully, we can then update the relevant licenses into the registered systems. And that's really helpful, because then when you perform your SAP audit, it automatically has assigned the correct license type to the relevant individual. And that report and that information is then part of your audit, so that you're never in a position of non-compliance or in a position of over or under licensing, because you now optimized your licensing. And you can also pull out multiple inactivity reports, and these are easy to then identify exactly the specific users that should be deactivated based on your specific rule set in the organization. So again, right sizing the licensing. How does SAMQ assign the licenses? We get many questions about how does it actually go about this process. On the right hand side, we've got a little bit of a blurb, if I can call it that, about how we actually manage this process to reduce the demand of licenses where licensing is specifically over licensed, and to ensure that it's easy, traceable and transparent and well documented. So really we start on the left-hand side here and we classify the users correctly before system measurement. The use rights, as we've discussed already, are defined in your contract with the SAP, so we take those into consideration. We have two different ways of doing this, and I'll talk about that in the next slide as well. Either you base it on use rights or authorizations, and in this case we have like a flick of a switch mechanism, and we determine based on if it's an authorization-based licensing contract that this is the mechanism by which we will measure the license assignments. And then we really aim to assign the least expensive license type. And this applies to the usage profile of every user that is using the SAP system in order to control the costs of your licensing. So bringing costs down, shrinking the license structure, or growing it depending on what your business is doing to make sure that you have the right size. And every criteria for licensing is traceable in SAMQ, so we check that traceability is available to you, and then we can technically write this back into the SU01 from a user maintenance perspective, and it happens automatically across all the systems. And that's really the process that we've just talked through. In context of the assignment between users and authorizations, it depends on the contract. As I said, the use rights definition from the contract, if we're based on a user transaction per system, if it's authorizations, the license types, quantities, and prices, and then we create the optimization of a user license proposal and a final user license assignment. And those are the two different options that you have from a contracting perspective for named user licenses. What's the business of value of using a SAMQ tool? We've just looked at named user licenses, and we apply similar principles to engines, and we look at the volume of engine usage, the volume of documentation in terms of digital access documents, and the volume of your database usage as well. But really it's to reduce the system measurement effort by up to 80%. So immediately you start saving time and energy in your SAP basis team. It also shows you compliance status about deficits and surpluses, and we can detect these and avoid you can avoid additional purchases when the company grows, because in many cases you have licenses that aren't being used, and you can repurpose those licenses from a named user license perspective, or you can exchange licenses out for additional products that are really needed from a demand perspective in the business. And we're thinking now about RISE. What other context may you need from a demand perspective in your RISE contract? There may be other products that you want to add into that. So this is important that you exchange those out. And really the whole thing is to better be able to negotiate and strengthen your argumentation with from a negotiation perspective with SAP. In a nutshell, it's really helping to ensure that you have control over your SAP licensing. And that's really being proactive in license management, and instead of being reactive. So we want customers to be as proactive as possible, and we help them make sure that they have that proactivity. Before we go to some next slides, I just want to run another quick poll with everybody. So now that you've seen some of the content that we've produced here in the slide deck, do you think you understand your license usage and how it would align to a new RISE with SAP contract? So I really want to understand, do you have a good understanding of your licensing and the way it's structured in your organization? Do you feel you're in control of it? It would be good to get some understanding of the value behind that. All right, the votes are coming in, which is great. Thank you for that. Okay, we're almost at 70%. I'll give it a few more seconds and then we'll close out the poll and we'll have a look at the results from the poll itself. And it's pretty much what we expect to see from a poll perspective. So let's close it out now. Okay. So from an understanding perspective, we see that at the top level, 9% understand their contract and the licensing and how they would need to align to a new RISE with SAP contract. So it's a very small proportion, similar to what we see in our normal projects. 1 out of 10 customers have their licensing almost accurate. And then in between that, we have a lower percentage at 75%, showing 22%, and 50% are showing 38% and 25-31. So almost close to 70% of the audience almost at a position where, you know, to understanding of the licensing contract to be able to move to RISE is really going to be challenged. So I think that's an important aspect to be aware of, and certainly we can help you with that should you need to move in that direction in the future. So let's go back to the slides, and it's just give you some context around how do companies ask us how do we contract, how do we engage with somebody like VOQUZ through HCL, what is the process that we do in order to start this and kickstart this process to understanding your licensing, and I think that's an important element to describe. So we normally have what we call a quick license assessment, and this is a very shortened 4-week scope exercise where we delve into your named user licenses. I'll share some more information about it afterwards, and we help to build a business case. The first point is to understand where are you at with your licensing, even currently, whether you want to move to RISE in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or you're still undecided. That still leaves you in a position of vulnerability, and it's always best to find out and start managing your license structure as of today if you're not managing it accurately. And we have a quick license assessment to do that. Thereafter, you can decide whether you need to continue with the SAMQ solution to ensure that you maintain your compliance, and that's the normal process. Most organizations move from the quick license assessment into using the solution to maintain it, and there we have 2 options in terms of a perpetual and a subscription use. Or alternatively, you say, well, we have a current challenge on our plate. We really need to understand our digital access. Why? Because we have heard that the digital access adoption program is ending at the end of this year. And if we don't make a decision, there's a potential to lose out on the 90% discount that SAP is offering for digital access documents, or the 115%. So we need to make some decisions, and that's often where customers come to us and they start engaging with us in an advisory type project, and they say, we need to understand this because we need to either stay on our legacy model or move to our digital access. It could be that you've had a negative audit recently and SAP have slapped you with a large bill, and you need to suddenly start justifying how you're going to pay this bill. Please come and speak to us. We can help you with that as well. Or if you're just deciding to remain on-premise and move just to the S/4HANA side, and you want to look at the contract migration, we often and have lots of customers that we help in that space as well. And once you've gone through that process and you've either engaged with us through one of those 2 or 3 different mechanisms, we have a managed service to help customers maintain their audits, compliance, etc., with across their current license landscape. And just in terms of the quick license assessment, it's as I said, it's a quick installation. We measure only the user licenses, we run the inactivity reports, we simulate alternative license types, and we evaluate your potential for improvement, and we give you a final presentation. And this really takes 4 to 6 weeks. For bigger clients, it's probably 6, but for most clients, it's around about 4 weeks. And we look at it, whether it's an investment to get a solution such as SAMQ in place to help you manage your license and get them all right sized, so that when that day arrives for your RISE with SAP, you're ready and you're prepared. And that's a better position to be in than to be unprepared. just a quick indication of effort. You can see here from a technical validation, it's roughly 15 hours of work, very quick, and it's all done remotely. No software to be installed in production systems, etc. It's very quick and easy to run. I'd like to just stop sharing for a second and just run a last poll just quickly before we go into some question time. So let's just get an understanding of what value you see in such a license optimization approach, and good to get some feedback from the clients just to see if this is a valuable proposition for them to look at in the close the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, or you need help right now. And we've had some customers who say, oh, we need help right now. We're about to start an engagement with SAP and we just don't know where to start, or we're about to sign some contracts. Please, can you help us make sure that we get the right sizing correct before we start that contract negotiation? All right, let's give it a little bit of time still. We've got a few more votes coming in. So alrighty, 5 more seconds and we'll close out the poll. If you haven't voted, now's your chance. Okay, great. Let's close this out at the moment. Okay, so in terms of, let me just share this. Okay, in terms of the poll results, you can see that there are a number of customers, especially over the next 12 months, that would see value in this, and that's a good indication, especially considering and aligning that to where RISE is, being very new. Certainly a place for more discussion and more engagement, and I'm sure we'll have some definitely a few more additional webinar sessions on RISE. It is very new at the moment, so everybody's getting to terms with it. 14% say in the next 6 months, so yes, quite a number there as well. 23% say in the next 24 months, so you know, customers and companies are coming through different areas of flux and transition. And then 6% say they need help right now. So if you're in that 6%, please reach out to us. We have you know, opportunities, especially now before the end of the year, where we see lots of organizations are trying to get everything closed out before Q4 or busy with an audit. Definitely is an opportunity to get and sort out your license landscape and make sure that it's the right size. Right, just in terms of contact details, Martin is available. That's his email address. We will, you're welcome to contact him from an HCL perspective and reach out to HCL, please, as our partner. Martin, I don't know, you're online there. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I'm back again. I apologize. Not sure what happened there, but you know, technology sometimes, you know, it's great when it works. I'm not sure exactly where I got cut off, but maybe just the final few words on my side. We as HCL, of course, we help our customers to take on the journey to cloud and the transformation that is required, not only from a technology point of view, which is the application and the infrastructure side of things, but also from a business side. And then also we very happy to engage with you to discuss the business benefits that you all want to actually, I mean, that's what we're all after. This should all be to realize benefits for the business. And I mean, Rogan has now pointed out how important it is that one actually gets a good understanding of the current positioning in terms of licenses, and then goes into the conversation about doing the right licensing for the RISE option, so that by the time that you move on to RISE, you know that you actually are licensed correctly, neither too little or too much. I think that's an important term, and it's always good to have your point of departure, to understand where am I at the moment, and how do I take that information and how do I use that in the negotiations then for signing up for a prescription model on the cloud including your hyperscaler infrastructure that SAP then provides. So thank you, Rogan, and I apologize again for the technology issues.
No, great stuff. Thanks, Martin, for that and for your insight there. We're just going to move to some questions, and there are quite a few questions in the chat, so let's move to some of those. I'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. There may be some that we're not able to answer in the session, but we can certainly write back to you on those sides. Yes, the presentation is available made after the session. Does SAMQ extend its support for both on-premise and cloud solutions? Yes, for on-premise at the moment. Cloud, we're in the process. We do have what we call a SAMQ Cloud connector, and are in the process of developing that further for SuccessFactors, Ariba, and other products in the SAP Cloud space. But in the meantime, we have a specific set of reports that we use to determine cloud usage, and I can share information around those should you need it. And then what will we do? So I'm just trying to read one of the questions here. Just give me a second. I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. This service doesn't really reduce the area for service providers. It really is a specific service related to SAP licensing and making sure you right size your licensing. So I'm not trying to understand your question there in terms of the context of development scope. You don't have to develop more in the context of development, if I understand it correctly. No, you're not having to do additional development. So maybe you want to clarify that question a bit more for me, and I can answer it again. With regard to RISE, who should we rely upon, SAP or hyperscaler providers? Very good question. I think there's benefits in both. We also work with large hyperscalers across the board, and certainly we can help point you to, if you have specific questions, to relevant individuals in each of the hyperscalers around their specific license offering. We are agnostic in this context. We don't say, oh, Azure is better than Google, or Google is better than AWS, or AWS is better than Microsoft. We're totally agnostic in this context. So, but we work with all three of them because many customers come via hyperscalers, and they have very strong relationship with those hyperscalers and want to understand what the value is in terms of moving via hyperscalers. So definitely, I think there's a combination there of looking to SAP or hyperscaler.
Rogan?
Yes.
Rogan, if I could just maybe add 30 seconds to that, right? I think one way of looking at this, and maybe that is actually where the question is going, is, should you actually just deal with SAP, who will then deal with the hyperscaler almost on your behalf, or you want to deal with SAP and the hyperscaler? If you want to simplify your landscape and your points of interaction, so to say, then I think the RISE option, which basically is you only deal with SAP, and SAP then already has got everything sort of arranged and negotiated with a hyperscaler. You only need a browser going forward, and so you don't actually need yet another team that manages your hyperscaler. You only manage SAP. And also from a service level agreement, SAP owns the entire SLA there, and that includes the uptime, right? And if something is not working, you just go straight to SAP, because they manage the hyperscaler in the backend, not for you to worry about the infrastructure at all. Whereas if you have got an SAP and a hyperscaler and there's an issue, they will start pointing fingers at each other. I mean, it really is it's a preference, I suppose, from anyone. And I think what SAP will tell you is that, and I think that's true from what I've seen, that they've pre-negotiated much better deals than what any sort of private company could get. And your total.
Martin, we just lost you there in terms of audio.
Cost of ownership should.
Martin, Ryan, repeat that last 2-3 sentences. We lost you there in terms of audio.
Because of happy to have a conversation about that.
Okay. Martin, I hope you can hear us there. We lost your audio for the last 2-3 sentences there. Do you want to repeat that? Okay, I'm not sure. We seem to be losing Martin there. Let me carry on with the next one. There is a question around the SAMQ cloud solution. I'm certainly happy to take this offline around our cloud-based solution and how it's being developed. So I'll reach out to you, Dominique, on that side. And I agree with you in terms of the user numbers and to be able to reconcile these from an audit number perspective. So certainly we can share with you where that development is going and where it is at this point in time. How does SAP know you have the users right on the right license? So 2 things there about SAP's audit process. One, they never optimize anything from an audit perspective. So when you use USMM and the S-Law, at no point in time in that process does SAP ever want or apply any optimization principles. They are very happy for you to have allocated licenses as you see fit. And in order to get them correctly licensed, you actually need to understand what the users are actually performing on the system. So from a correction or from a understanding of are our users on the right license, what SAMQ really does using the transactional database and the rules that we set up is it actually goes and determines the usage of each end user and then just defines the correct license type for that end user. And that's a fundamental difference in the context of that. Just to give you clarification, we also have with one of the tier 1 partners a certification that our license tool manages this correctly. So if you want to, you can reach out to us on that and I can share that information with you. Are we going to have this document as reference? Yes, just please reach out to us at VOQUZ Labs and we can share this. This webinar is recorded, so you're welcome to review this from a reference perspective. We do have about 3 minutes left, but I'd just like to check if there are any other questions. As I said, from a RISE perspective, we will definitely do more and more as we get more information from SAP and as they develop this more. We've been in contact with them over various different elements. And just to give you an indication, we are working on some other aspects from a webinar perspective, so please check in with us. In September, we've got 10 tips and tricks around managing your next SAP audit, and then later on in September, in terms of our next webinar about information around how to migrate to S4HANA from a authorizations and roles perspective, what do you need to move across there, etc. Okay, one more question. If any user uses some of the transactions once a year, can it be taken care of? Yeah, we have to understand which that user is and whether or not that user specifically requires just that transaction at one point in time. But certainly that's something that we need to discuss from a business perspective. We often have cases where the business would like to identify those individuals because they're paying user licenses for a once-off transactional use per year, and it may not be relevant for them to pay that license every year if one individual is using a once-off transaction. So that's another side to think about. Just be aware of that. It works both ways around in the context of what you asked there. Good. I think we're pretty much on time. I'm going to close off the webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us, join us on our next webinars. And I would like to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you to HL for joining us on today's webinar, to Martin and some of the other team. Please, thank you for that. This can be used, so just one last question, useful S4HANA, it can also be used for ECC. So if you're on an ECC solution, we can certainly help you with ECC. It was actually developed initially for ECC before S4HANA came out, and we subsequently, the tool runs for S4HANA without a problem at all. So both systems, if you're going from ECC to S4HANA, we can use it either way. Great. Thank you, everyone, for today, and wish you a safe and successful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.